thank you very much. As you know, we are also live streaming Tiel's reading, so we're having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're getting going pretty well here. The thanks that I wanted to make are to the city of Milwaukee. The city of Milwaukee has supported us from the beginning, and we're in our 16th year. Secondly, I want to thank the Leading Library. This is just, it's a beautiful library. And I want to thank the Leading Library for their support and us having the readings here in this beautiful community room. Thirdly, we have a poetry committee. So as you know, people work on this. You have to have people working on something to have something happen. So thanks to the poetry committee and also to our two partners. So we've just heard one of our partners. Thanks to the Willamette Falls Media Center, who are doing the live stream. So thank you very much for our technician there, Josh Reynolds. We appreciate that a lot. And thank you to the Leading Library staff, and in particular, Robert Langston, who is our technician from the Leading Library. Can we give Robert a hand? Yeah. So thank you very much. Before I introduce Tiel, we're here tonight on the day after election. And I've been thinking about that a lot today and just reading some websites and some things about what poets said about the election. And one of the websites I want to draw your attention to is that there's some good material on the Academy of American Poets. Now, I'm sure that there are a lot of other very valuable websites, but here's one thing that they have. And this is a quote from Jane Hirschfield. When you're asking what is the role of a poet in a society, in a culture, in a country, in a community, it's to respond in a way that only poetry can. And that touched me. So that seems like something that we can take away as far as we're thinking about just things that are going on. Some races are still up in the air. And what our role is in the society and with this. So, Tiel Ansari. I'm very happy to have Tiel with us tonight as our November poet. Tiel is a Sufi warrior poet. Her work has been featured in Fault Lines Poetry, Windfall, K-Boo, and in Every Man's Library Anthology, among others. Her collections include Knocking from Inside, High Voltage Lines, Country Well Known as an Old Nightmare Stable, The Day of My First Driving Lesson, and the recent Dervish Lions. She works as a data analyst for the Portland Public School District and is president emerita of the Oregon Poetry Association. I know directly all of the contributions she's made to the poetry community here in Portland and to all of us with her work for many years at the Oregon Poetry Association. So thank you for that. She hosts the Wider Window Poetry Show on K-Boo. And if you take a look at the invitation, there is a link to that. And there is also a link to her website where you can get more information about Tiel. Join me in welcoming our poet, Tiel Ansari. Tiel.
Thank you, Tom, for that wonderful, wonderful warm welcome. It's a very great pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this reading series. I've attended this series many times over the years. It's always excellent poetry. I found a lot of inspiration here. And perhaps more importantly, I've always found a warm and loving welcome. And this is really an exceptional, not only a poetry series, but a poetry community that has been home to me for many years now. And it's such a great pleasure to be able to give back, to contribute to this series as a reader. So I'm going to start by reading a couple of poems from this book, the day of my first driving lesson, which came out from the Poetry Box in Portland in January of 21. And this is a verse memoir about my parents who had passed away, one in 2018 and one in 2019. Well, what do you do with a loss like that when you're a poet? You write about it. And in this book, this series of poems, they don't actually have titles. They're identified by the year in which the event being described takes place. So I'm going to read a few. And the first one really kind of speaks to what I just said about this reading series. 2018, the day my father went into hospice care, I took the Orange Line to Milwaukie. My mother had said we shouldn't come to Hawaii. It would change nothing, just cause her a lot of stress. He'd been gone ever since the stroke. It was more than 3 years. I went on with life as if nothing had changed or was about to. I'd planned to go to the Stafford reading. I didn't back out. It was January. It was 58 degrees. The sun slanted low and warm across the tracks. The train rocked me as gently as if it knew. This next poem takes place in 1969. I would have been 5 years old at the time. And it may explain a lot about my attitude, but anyway, I'll let you be the judge of that. The day I got the best advice of my life. The day I got the best advice of my life was the day I asked my mother, why do some kids believe in Santa? I knew where gifts came from. Grandparents sent them. Aunts, uncles, family, friends, real people. Christmas meant leaving Philadelphia in the dark, cold dawn over domes with chemical names, looming above the marshes along the New Jersey Turnpike, among strange stinks that woke me in the back seat. Across tidal flats with no sea in sight, Manhattan's skyline floated against a smoggy horizon. Gray towers over a tangle of asphalt loops, rows of brownstones, cliffs of New York granite. In the shadow of the George Washington Bridge, which I thought of as an extra grandparent, we ate roast lamb with macaroni and cheese with my father's family in Yonkers. Or after a visit to the Buddhist temple in the Bronx, noodle soup, stewed pork hocks, peanut and pressed tofu salad. I said we shouldn't leave the tree in case the glass birds ate the toy fruit. Grown-ups called me imaginative. We unwrapped presents, thank you hugged the givers, played Pounce and Scrabble, went to bed in guest rooms, or fell asleep in homebound cars, clutching new toys and warm with hugs. I couldn't see what Santa had to do with it. I had to ask. My mother said, some people think lying to children doesn't count as lying. And then this one takes place in 1979. So I'm about 15 at this point. The day the elephant came wandering through the camp, I was reading on the cabin porch, pretending I didn't see it, courting risk, thrill, my parents' anxious attention, until he put his foot on the porch step, where later I showed my shocked parents a footprint of crusted dirt, just feet from my chair, inquisitive trunk raised high above my head. My nerve broke. I crept into the cabin. The elephant sauntered off through the camp, right past our window, ears billowing like gray sails. My parents scolded me gently about wild animals and the difference between caution and fear. That evening in the outhouse, I heard tearing grass and looked out to see a vast absence of stars. The same old bull grazing his way through camp, not disturbed by a small human with a kerosene lantern. Whatever held me on the porch was whispering, "Go on, it's perfectly safe." This elephant is used to people. And anyway, he knows you're here. Who are you kidding? This is safety. This outhouse is way too flimsy to protect you. I kept still. My father brought the car to fetch me. The elephant wandered off. I think he wondered what all the fuss was about. Thank you. I'm going to switch gears a bit and read one poem from this book, Country Well Known as an Old Nightmare Stable. This book launched in April of 2020, which was terrible timing. Everyone had gone into the first round of lockdowns. There were no live poetry events happening. Most people had not figured out the Zoom thing yet. We're still figuring it out, right, Robert? So this book didn't get a lot of outings. The poems haven't had a lot of exposure. So I am going to read one, which is titled Stormy Friday, and it's kind of a good poem for this time of year. We get more rainbows on those stormy days when hail dots the ground like shattered glass. The thunderheads that set the sky ablaze with lightning legs in drunkards walk, as crazed as centipedes that rumble fiercely past, yet more rainbows. On those stormy days, the sun seems bright by contrast. Sloping rays throw arcs of color on the looming mass of thunderheads. We've set the sky ablaze again, my love. We're spinning dizzy, dazed by brilliance. We're reeling from the blast. We'll get more rainbows in these stormy days of post-concussion ozone breath. Amazed by flash and thunder, falling, rising fast like thunderheads that set the sky ablaze. We're miracles, disasters, tidal waves, the rescue and the risk, the push and crash. We are the rainbows on these stormy days. We are the thunder. We are the skies that blaze. Thank you. So, Dervish Lions, this is my collection that came out from Fernwood Press in January of this year, which was a very great thrill to me. This book is divided into 3 sections. I'm going to read poems from all 3 sections. The first part is really poems of place. Many of them are places in and around Portland, in and around Oregon. Some of them are from a little further away. The first one is from Mosier. Actually, it was written at Horsethief Lake Park, which is across the Columbia from Mosier on the Washington side. And it's titled Watching the Mosier Fire, August 28th, 2009. Wind rips white spume from smoke-colored water, yanks the car door back on its hinges. Fire whips along the cliffs. There's copper haze on the bluffs east of Mosier, like a blanket draped over an old woman's bony knees. Terrified trees throw up their arms, mimicking the petroglyphs of Horsethief Lake, who have seen so many fires before. A river away, the air tastes of ash. Smoke carries across state lines. So does the rumble of a truck on I-84 carrying a windmill vane twice the length of a semi. Against this continent of air, it's a puny slice, a fingernail paring, like a human lifetime measured by the ancient stare of the rock figures who watch the blaze. In the wind's grasp, water-smooth stones wobble and rattle across the splintery top of a picnic table. In the grass flat, killdeer call, my patch, mine, untroubled by wind, smoke, or their own tininess. I am more tree than stone, more bird than tree, the most temporary dweller in this kingdom of wind. Kingdom of Wind is actually the subtitle of this first section. And then the next poem I'd like to read from this section. I love book darts, by the way. They're the greatest invention in the world. This is from the Oregon Coast. It's titled The Lion Tamer. Behind the Fred Meyer in a small coastal town, a wave of sand is frozen against the sky. Silhouette of a sleeping lion, softened by grass-like pale fur. Every day, hard-edged grains spill into the parking lot. Every week, a truckload of sand is hauled off and dumped. Wind and tide and marching sand would eat this coastline, devour whole towns, except that dune grass stopped the lions in their tracks and made them to lie down, tamed their relentless hunger, dulled the flying claws that scrape paint from walls of houses every windy afternoon. Lion tamer, you build solid ground, safe harbor for deep roots. But I yearn to run over rippling sand as gulls fly over water. Let the sleeping lions rise up, fur streaming wild in the wind. Let them shed their chains of braided grass and bury the highway with immense tawny paws. Let their silica teeth scour away my flesh. Let my bones lie white and polished in the lair of lions. And one more from this section. Death on the Markham Trail. If you haven't done much walking in the Portland area, there are a lot of really fascinating little walking trails that go basically all over town. And the Markham Trail goes, well, it links together a lot of locations along the ridge of the hills that are west of Portland, including Council Crest, which is the highest point within city limits. And this poem starts with an epigraph from Mahmoud Darwish. He says, "You're going to die here this evening. So what will you do in the time that remains?" I would put on my walking shoes. For some time, I've wanted to climb the Markham Trail to the top of Council Crest, ambition sized just right for a spring afternoon. So I'd take the Max to Goose Hollow, disembark, find the trailhead, sweat and breathe hard on the steep uphills, look both ways, crossing infrequent roads, grab trees to pull myself upslope and get my clothes all stained with moss, slide in the mud, sweat and breathe hard. Nothing like climbing hills steeper than stairs to make you curse the rain, forget death, cling to life, sweat, breathe hard. Death is at the back of my neck. The trees part at the ridge. I fall into the sky. So the second section of this book is titled Countries of Origin. And it deals with both my background, my parents, and my upbringing. I grew up in Tanzania. We lived there for about 10 years. And many of the poems in this section deal with that. Starting with this one, which is titled Z-frame doors. And this was a very common way of building doors in Tanzania. You would have the vertical slats, and then you would have a horizontal across the top, a horizontal across the bottom, and then one diagonal bracing the whole thing. So there was this Z, capital Z, on each of the doors. I should remember so much more. Names of teachers, faces of friends, but all I have is Z-frame doors, painted green and hung in walls of whitewashed cinder block. Went to school in a foreign tongue, learned it young. It was easy when the classroom doors swung to, caged with the smell of chalk. What had we to do but talk? The schoolyard was dust. We played hopscotch and bow and dodgeball till the teacher scolded us for getting dirty, then thirsty. Went to drink from faucets at the outdoor sinks, hands cupped under running water in the tropic sun. The national anthem sung to assembly every morning and afternoon. Mungu ibariki, God bless Tanzania. creaky Z-frame doors, and mangoes ripening in resin-smelling shade. They taught us names of leaders who resisted, fought the trade in slaves, waged war on colonial plantations with any weapon that came to their fists. A later age laid political sophistication over exploited rage. One independence with no blood shed, no red on the flag our anthem raised. I've forgotten all the history, but this remains. The anthem's heart-lifting refrain, windows without panes of glass, language, and doors with green Z-frames. Tanzania at that time in the 1970s was mostly a subsistence agriculture economy, and the main occupation for the majority of people there at that time was agriculture. And we participated in that a fair amount, especially when I was in boarding school. So this poem speaks to that a little bit. It's titled Medium of Exchange. Sweat under endless rows of rustling corn, sore hands, aching back, feet caked with field mud, broken bleeding blisters growing to cold callus. My hands still remember the handle of the hoe, heavy tool meant to break earth, chop stubborn weeds, bite deep as a moldboard plow. Whatever undergrowth under head-high corn, my hoe, my hands missed came back to haunt at harvest. Spiny thickets stifling grain, reducing yield, dragging down the standard of living from beef to beans, from nourishment to near malnutrition. Corn for cash, grain for grinding. The more to the mill, the more to buy meat. Field labor for food, calluses for corn, blisters for beef. Thank you. So the last part of this book is titled Province of Saints, and it is the spiritual part. That's not true. All of my poetry is spiritual in intent and inspiration, if not in content. You know, it doesn't have to be about God, and it doesn't have to be preachy to be spiritual poetry or religious poetry. But many of the poems in the last part of this book are explicitly religious or explicitly spiritual. Let's see, so the first one I would like to read was actually, the inspiration for this came to me during a workshop that was led by Annie Lightheart, which was here in Milwaukee. It was at the Pond House at the time. And much as I love the Learning Library, I sort of missed the Pond House. It was a great little space. Thorn, come closer, I will scratch you. Is it a bloodletting? Am I letting you out of your skin or the world in? When you fly to the rose, I will meet you there. When you stroke your cat and draw electric sparks from her fur, I am hidden in your paw. When the falcon comes to your shoulder, you will feel me. When you learn to read, you will see I have tattooed your body with all the names of God. And this poem is titled 5 Views of a Glass Door, and it's divided into 5 sections, which happen to correspond to the 5 eyes of Buddhism as described in various Buddhist writings. There's a good summary that was actually written by my grandfather, C.T. Shen, which I won't go into right now, but it was from him that I learned everything I know about Buddhism. 5 Views of a Glass Door. 1. A green bird flies into a glass door in a flurry of feathers as tender as elm leaves in spring. She breaks into luminescent fragments of song. 2. The glass is thick and won't break no matter how hard you bang into it. There are no walls and no roof. Why don't you just go around? 3. The street you see through it or reflected in it is not really there on either side of the door that isn't there either. 4. A green bird is trapped in the glass, flat and screaming. Don't you hear her? Break that glass and let her out. 5. The door opens. So I'm going to read some newer work. How am I doing for time? Okay. So this is a prose poem. It's titled Antarctic Glaciers Are Like Old Men and was recently published in a journal called the Tiny Journal. Don't ask me, that's what they call it. Antarctic glaciers are like old men, lying on the coast like old white men in beach chairs, arms behind their heads, heels dug into the sand to keep from sliding. Only now the water is rising, lifts them so their feet no longer touch bottom, like yours when you were small and tried to sit in grown-up chairs. Now they're like old men in a swimming pool, floating with elbows hooked over the edge. They sweat, fevered. Their limbs crevasse and calve. They stare up into the relentless sky, a little puzzled, a little worried, perhaps. How did I get like this? Once I bowed at the foot of the Athabasca Glacier because I was awed at the thought of all that time. Time is what glaciers are made of, not frozen water. Minutes and hours falling from the sky in endless accumulation, packing down into layer upon layer upon layer. The past is less substantial even than a snowflake, and yet there it was, a solid wall of time sloping down before me. The old men of Antarctica have lost their grip. They're drifting, white hair thinning away from their heads. Their flesh, cold, compacted time, gives up its memories. Ice caves limbed in sapphire and emerald, floored with rocks scraped from an unseen continent, collapse and melt. Now they're skeletons, a scatter of giant bones on the face of the water. A femur the size of Manhattan, giant ship killer bergs of vertebrae, all formed of dissolving history. This extinction will leave no fossils. And then this poem is about Capilano Suspension Bridge Park, which is outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. And if you're ever there, I would definitely encourage you to check it out. The Capilano River is not a big river, but it runs through a very steep, very narrow, and quite deep gorge, vertical cliffs. And there's this suspension bridge across it, and there's this park on both sides of the river. And on one side of the park, what they've done, they've gone up into the canopy of these giant trees and built this whole network of platforms and catwalks. So you can actually walk through the forest canopy and you feel like you're flying. So this is titled, Above the Capilano River. What was it that made me suddenly think I could fly? Swan dive into the river of mist rushing soundless through the canopy, condensing to crystal beads pendant on the needle-tipped leaves of the towering firs, sentinels of the Pacific Northwest rainforest that reared all around me, raking water out of the fog to replenish their roots far, far below where the bear and the pine marten walk, yet still far above the deep-sounding gorge of the Capilano, above the cliffs that embrace the white surge of the Capilano. What left me breathtaken with delight on the high catwalk wasn't the limitless abundance of water, river replenished by snow on distant mountains, nor the splendor of rainforest whispering to my heart, stay, stay, never leave here, never leave. But thunder shaking the woods, scattering drops from green canopy like a storm on the river, unfolding the broad white wings of a swan. This poem is titled Windward Shore Surf. and it's about the windward shore or shores of the islands of Hawaii. And there's one word in here that may not be familiar to, which is opihi. It's an edible limpet that is a delicacy to the indigenous people of Hawaii, but it only grows on the rocks where the roughest surf is. So collecting opihi is a pretty dangerous occupation. Windward shore surf. It hammers, it hollers, it's a rage of white tigers, a pack on the hunt. It gouges, it grinds, strips sand from the shoreline and flesh from your bones. Your feet feel the shred and the suck crest curl undertow shaking the breakwater. It rips a riptide all along the coast, boat tosser slam bang spurts from the cliff top like spouting whales, makes opihi pickers run for their lives. It'll drag you and drown you, shake, shatter, and roll you. It throws spindrift half a mile inland, salt glaze your windshield, lick your lips and taste it. It'll chew you and spit you, slap you and hit you, sing about trade winds and batter you to bits. It's a shouter, a braggart, a wall of green thunder, a stone-splitting giant with black sand for teeth, a wind-driven, moon-hooked gnasher at the world's edge, a brass band hallelujah in the world's biggest church. Thank you. So one more newer poem that I'd like to read is titled Revelation Tread Marks. Revelation, wreck me, skid me sideways into enlightenment like a 10-car pileup on a frost-sick freeway. Make me pay something. Complacency and comfort are not sacrifice enough. So overcharge me and leave me at the corner with my sandwich board reading "The End is Nigh." Make me a laughing stock. Send me on a wild goose chase, a snipe hunt, and X marks the spot where 100 treasure hunters already foregathered, and show me a cemetery full of pre-robbed graves. Trip hammer me like sheets of copper foil, draw me into fine wire, melt my bones with a ball of lightning. Revelation, spin me out on black ice, and I'll let go the wheel. I'll be the tread marks on the median, the guardrail gap. Thank you. I'd like to go back to Dervish Lions for one more poem. And this is titled, Brother Death, Won't You Walk With Me? The path through the forest is dark. A bony hand is more comfort than no hand at all. The rapids roar with white spray. Your teeth gleam beside me. The path winds through a tight gut of stone. Click, clack, say your fingers. Sun glows on the peak of the mountain before us. Sparks in the eternal night of your eye socket. The angels are arguing about whether I should go on. You stand silent and motionless. I drink emptiness from the bowl of the moon. You have taken the unfinished book from my hand. Thank you.
So are you ready for questions and answers?
I am ready for questions. I don't know about the answers, but I'm ready for questions.
Do you have a poem for the end too?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I can start. Who are you reading?
Who am I reading?
Who do you read now?
Oh,
Who would you say influenced you?
I read pretty widely. I subscribe to a number of Poem a Day emails, Rattle, Poetry Foundation. There's one called Swim, which I cannot tell you what it stands for now. There are several, some are daily, some are weekly, some are occasional, and typically those will have poems from a lot of different poets. So I'm exposed to a lot of different poets, and generally in terms of influence, I think almost every poet that I've read, more than just one or two poems, has had some influence on me. Sometimes it's, okay, that's what I want to not do. I think I've drawn a lot of inspiration from poets. I've been reading a lot of the Turkish mystic poets. Rumi, of course, is the most famous, but also he was the best known in America, but he comes from a huge tradition of Sufi mystic poetry in Turkey and regions sort of around there. And many of them have not been translated or have not been translated very much, but if you search around, you can find some of their writings. I think when I read Abdullah Foucault's, I had a book with me that was by Yunus Imre, who was a Turkish poet of the same generation as Rumi. And also Antonio Machado is a poet who I think has had a lot of influence on me. He writes in Spanish, so you have to find him in translation if you don't actually read Spanish. He has really outstanding poetry. Mm-hmm. What brought your family to Tanzania? Well, my parents wanted to leave the US for a while, and this was in the early 70s. They were not ideologically aligned with the Nixon administration. I'll just leave it at that. And so they looked for somewhere they could go that was peaceful, and they looked for places that had not been in the news at all. Because when countries are in the news, it's always for something bad, right? And Tanzania was one place that they found that really hadn't shown up in the news a lot. It was peaceful, it was quiet. There wasn't a whole lot of newsworthy stuff going on there. So they figured it would be a good place to live for a while. Mm-hmm. I've done both. Sometimes I've gone places with intentionally that I'm going to come away with something, and then I'll usually carry paper. For a while, I carried a small pad and pen with me just everywhere, and I would jot things down. Recently, I think I've become more confident in my ability to sort of mentally capture the experience, the moment, and so I will go someplace and look around and be inspired and go, I need to remember this, and sort of capture that and then write from it later. The Capilano River poem that I read, let me see if the date is on here. It's not, but I visited the Capilano Bridge Suspension Park in the fall of 2019. That was before, obviously. And I think the poem I probably wrote a year and a half to 2 years later.
Wow. Do you have notes? Or did you write it all from memory?
That one I wrote off from memory, but the Capilano Bridge Park is not a place you can forget.
Have you always written poetry? Is there something that
Yes, no. If God is merciful, my mother destroyed that notebook. So when I was a kid, I thought I was going to grow up to write books. I thought I was going to grow up to be a science fiction author, because that was mostly what I read, was fantasy and science fiction. I wrote a lot of stories when I was young, but kind of throughout my life, at moments of intense emotion, I had a tendency to spontaneously break out in poetry. And I never took it seriously. And then after I converted to Sufism in 2005, suddenly poetry just kind of took over my life, took over the creative part of me and my creative output. And I thought, okay, I guess that's where we're going.
Well, it seems so counter to data analysis, which is what you do every day in your work. You look for trends in data, but you don't
that turns out not to be true. So data in themselves don't really mean anything. My job as a data analyst is not only to understand what's in the data, but to convey it to other people and to tell the story of what the data are telling. And so it's, in both cases, it's about communication, and it's about clear and rigorous and effective communication. So no matter how, people say, oh, the data speak for themselves. No, they really don't, any more than the Capilano River does, or some other object might. It's for us as humans to find the voice in something and bring it forth. That, I believe, is our greatest gift as humans. Somebody got an easy question?
What was your first poem and what got you started writing poetry?
All right, so. All right, well, when I was 6, my parents and I and my brother went to Virginia Beach, which is in New Jersey, to see the solar eclipse there. 6 or 7, I can't remember exactly what year that was. And I was overwhelmed by the solar eclipse. It was just an utterly stunning event. It completely blew my small child mind. And as the sun came out from behind the moon and light was returning to the countryside, I burst into tears. Suddenly, in the middle of the tears, I stopped and I said, "Black and white and blue, and on the horizon a sunset blue." And then I started crying again. So this was my first poem, literally, Jane. This was the first kind of spontaneous eruption of poetry that I mentioned. And there were a few more like this over the years. But after I converted to Sufism, I started with haiku, a lot of little haiku, just about little things that happened and sort of impressed me. And I sort of graduated to writing in longer forms. Early on, I wrote a villanelle, which is in my first book, Knocking from Inside, which unfortunately is out of print. But so that there's been a lot of development there.
Any more questions? How was the poetry in
Marzials is the author of what may be the worst poem ever written in the English language. I will not, well, I don't have it memorized, thank goodness, because reading this poem is actually like having a giant African snail eat your brain and vomit it back up in steaming green slime. I'm serious. If you think you're up to it, you can Google Marzials. His name is spelled M-A-R-Z-I-A-L-S. The poem is titled A Tragedy. It is awful. It is the worst poem I've ever read in my life. And Marzials is definitely one of those poems that inspires you to be nothing like him.
Tell us how you really feel.
That is how I really feel about Marzials. And what's odd about it is he made his living as a songwriter, a professional songwriter in the early 20th century. And we actually found a small book of his poetry, most of which is unexceptional, unmemorable. But this one poem, oh my word. Anyway. Great, everyone in this room is gonna go Google that and be brain blasted, and it's all your fault. That's my husband, by the way.
Well, do you want to read your concluding poem?
I can do that. Actually, why don't I read this one? I'll read the first poem, in this book as the last poem of the evening. 1960. The day my parents went to get the wedding license, the registrar told them the law required a blood test. The reason was syphilis, but no one ever said so. My father's friend Ralph was the son of a doctor. He opened his office for them, although it was a Saturday. Ralph was a witness at the wedding, and later he married a girl who wasn't Jewish. His father never spoke to him again. My mother's parents didn't approve of my dad, but they came to the wedding and signed the guest book, their names in Chinese. In the photo, my parents look impossibly young. On the license, my father's side says colored. My mother's side says yellow. This is the photo right here, top left corner. These are my parents, my young parents. And there's actually a scan of the marriage license here on the first page. It's all true.
Thank you so much, Tiel, for being with us. Yeah, it's been a delight. I've been really looking forward to it. Happy that we were able to have you here. So that was great. Thank you all for being here and spending the time with us. Our next poet is Suzanne Siglus, and she's going to be here December 14th, which is the second Wednesday of December. Thank you all for being here. I'm Tom Hogan for the Milwaukie Poetry Series. Say good night to everyone who was on the live stream. Thank you all for being here. Oh yeah, and my lovely wife Jane is selling Tiel's books, so they are back there on the table back there. Please talk with her, see what you think might be my life.